Along about 1300, the European world had a little ice age. And during that little ice age, the Earth cooled 4 degrees. Doesn't sound like much, but it isn't like going over to the thermostat and turning it down. It's like now. The weather became very unpredictable, and human beings really need predictable. So, and you don't have to make this as fancy as I am here, but you should label it Little Ice Age. And what does that mean as far as us humans? Well, when there was no summer, there were no crops that grow in the fields, and people starved. The other thing that can happen too is when weather is unpredictable, you don't know when to plant. You don't know how to prepare for the weather change, which we all do by getting out our coats in the wintertime. And those people often had to make their coats, so they actually had to weave the sheep's wool into coats and sweaters and whatnot. People did not have lots of clothes. They probably had 2 tops, maybe even 1 pair of pants. Now, pants as we know it were not really big in the Middle Ages and times in the past. They kind of wore what we would think of as high socks, and then men would often wear what looked like shorts. So it was a whole different time. And women wore skirts that went to the ground, which means it dragged on the ground and it got into muck. It was a difficult time. Okay, as you may have remembered, I hope you remembered from class, people stopped living in cities like the city of Paris and London and Rome. The Visigoths and Vandals attacked the water supply, the aqueducts. And so when you don't have a clean source of water, there's no sense of living in the city. So most people started living out in the fields, unless you were well-to-do and had, a big castle and you had your own well and all sorts of things like that. Now, some people had wells, but most people used a water supply, like a creek or something like that. And water probably wasn't that clean. What looks to here like a really bad hairdo is the roof. It was made of straw, like this. It was yellow until it aged and it kind of went gray-brown, maybe even black. And this right here, if you draw it sideways like that, is your chimney. They did not have chimneys. Chimneys are not going to show up for some time, and they have to come with the building of houses out of stone and brick. Now, they did have things made out of stone and brick, but not very much, because if you have to make your own bricks, you're not going to have that many brick buildings. We're going to put a little bridge here, and we'll give it a keystone. This probably took more effort than anything, is making the little bridge here. Or it could have been left over from Roman times, because they used anything they could find. So we have this little bridge, and we're going to put an angled line, a oblique angle there, and then have it run up to the top, and we'll color that in. And that tells us it wasn't a very wide bridge, just a little bridge. And then we have the side of the bridge on the water, and again, the side of the bridge, and then the water. So this is a pretty wide little creek. And that is the stone that made this little bridge. These would have been fitted together. They were sort of stones, but they were just fitted. So make them wiggly waggly squares, so they can be different widths, and this will probably take you a while. And as I told you, the younger kids would keep this fire going in the house. And in the wintertime, they would actually bring in the animals. So we're going to have two structures here, and the people would live with their animals. Now, if you remember what I told you about the bubonic plague, how it comes from fleas, that would be the time that fleas were a problem. And then they got it in their silly little human brains that cats were evil. I want to remind you that cats kill rats, and the rats were the ones that had the fleas. Notice I'm not making any of these particularly uniform, because they wouldn't have been uniform. They didn't have the time. If you were just fitting rocks together like this, and you'll see some of these along the roads and country roads where stones have just been fitted together. Okay, so back to the fleas. Here they've decided that cats are dangerous. They're in league with the devil. Cockamamie people. And they kill a great many cats. And since the cats are the ones that kill the rats that have the fleas, sounds like the beginning of a children's song, then, and this is more for the animals, like the horses and oxen, not to fall off the bridge, not so much for people. And they're just going to be almost like trees. So the cats are not there to kill the rats, and golly gee, the plague just goes crazy. It gets on the sheep, it gets on the chickens, they get on, what else? You would have horses, you would have oxen, you would have cows. So all your animals that you drag inside to keep them from dying in the cold are coming in with fleas. Now notice that this is overlapping. Overlapping is a way that artists use perspective to tell you, and you know this, then that you are to walk between these posts. So, and then there's a fence on the other side, and it would be further back, so it would appear smaller even if they're the same size. So this here is the road, and this is the road. This is where the people cross the bridge, and it probably had so much dirt on it over time that you couldn't see the stone. So here's our bridge here. And then we can put some weeds along the side. And I don't know if you've ever heard of pussy willows, but they're brown weeds that would be on the side. Okay, so now we have to draw the bottom of our home here. And interestingly enough, in many parts of England, they've sealed up the hole up there and put in a fireplace, but they still use these structures. And they would have been made pretty much with squared off logs. So I'm going to put my log up here. And they would have posts on the side, and I think I explained to one of my classes, they wouldn't have a lot of windows. Part of that was because many places taxed you by the number of windows you had. So, what's this? Oh, this is my cousin. Okay, so let's get the board down here, and maybe have one here. Okay, now, if you had a window, very likely that window would have sheepskin over it. And sheepskin, when it is not woven into wool, is called vellum. And write that down with your notes somewhere. Vellum, sheepskin. Now they use sheepskin to write on. Of course, these people probably can't write, but the priests and monks in the monasteries would use sheepskin to write on. But here it would be used as a window covering because glass was too hard to come by. So it was an interesting time. And as I've said before, they had what's called a Dutch door, and we won't show one here because it's behind the fence. Let's just give them a regular old door. And as far as a doorknob, unless they had a a blacksmith who would make them a little latch that comes down, not unlike a garden gate. Then they probably just have a piece of rope that they pulled on, and they had to get their own rope or weave it themselves. So, okay, so this structure was probably the first structure, and then they built a second one back here. Now, notice that these triangles here are kind of rough. That's because this is just piled on top of wood, and I'm not quite sure how they probably tied part of it down, but they also just counted on gravity to keep it there. Let's put a piece of wood here and then bring it across and attach there. They didn't have nails. What they used is called dovetail joints. So if you will take a carpentry class, you carve into the wood and then you carve out on the wood, and they would fit together like this. And that's a dovetail joint. And when we get in class, maybe I'll bring in something that has a dovetail joint. So in a sense, it was way stronger than nails because it didn't come off. So this was their first little house they built. And they're going to have a Dutch door on this one. And we'll bring it down here. And a Dutch door is a half door. Here's your little piece of rope you got in your door. And there was a piece across like that and pieces of wood there. And then this part would be open. So that would let the odors from cooking out and probably the smell of people who didn't bathe very often. But it would also keep the chickens out, because we'll give them a couple of chickens. That's a chicken. So we don't want him coming in the house. In the wintertime, of course, we'll bring him in, but it's summertime right here. Just before it starts to snow in, say, August, late August, because that was the problem. And we will give it a window up here. And if you had to make your own glass, could you make your own glass? This is that vellum up there over the window. And let's give them a couple of windows on the side, or at least one. I don't know if they'd want a couple of windows, because that could be expensive as far as taxes, not to mention the heat going out. We'll do this. This one has its vellum blowing in the wind, and this is just a solid wall. Now, I'm going to color in with a brown crayon. I can find a decent brown crayon that's the right shade of brown. Nope, that's not it. Here's a good brown. Okay, so this is wood. Eventually, this wood will turn black just because of age and being exposed to the environment. It's never painted or anything. And the white part here will stay white. And I know you're thinking, why would it stay white? Well, eventually they do come up with something like paint, and then they paint the white part. They never did seem to paint the wood part. I guess they think that was a waste of time and money. So you're going to color that in. I want to make that even. Here's our framing around our door. Now, I will show you how to color this next week, and this has to be in by the 22nd. You've got your cathedral, your Hagia Sophia, and this is your farmhouse. I'm going to call it the farmhouse. And I would like you to write farmhouse on it. And this farmhouse would be very typical of a structure in the 1300s. So, no, that's blue. Although you can always, if you don't have a black, you can always outline things with blue. It looks nice. So you can use that. All right. Here's our source of drinking water. It's got to come up over on the other side. And our chicken has gone across the bridge and can't figure out how to get back. Now we need a horizon line. over here, and let's get a tree in here. Remember, a tree is like a series of Y shapes. So see how that's a Y shape? And then a Y, and then a Y, and a Y, and Y. A Y, a Y. Can't you draw a tree? All right, so we have our tree here, and we have our fields, and I'm guessing that it's probably autumn, and you have a large stack of straw here. Straw is bedding for both people and animals at this point in history. So I'm going to color that yellow. Put some yellow in our thatched roof. This is called a thatched roof. So we've got a thatched roof, T-H. Thatched roof. And we have vellum on the windows, and we have a Dutch door. That's what it's called now. It's probably just called a door back then. So here's our Dutch door right here. And for you guys, it'd probably be best just to either color it in with a pencil or use a black pen to color this in, because we wouldn't be able to see inside. There would be light coming from our two windows, one here and one over there, but it would be pretty dark in there. And there's no glass to reflect light, so I'm going to go around this a little harder so you can see it a little bit better. Nobody went to school. The church made sure all the births and deaths were recorded. There was no paperwork that said you owned the land. You just sort of sat down and there you were, which is why later on conquerors would come and take land from people like the Scots in the 1600s. And even though they lived there for hundreds of years, they couldn't hang on to the land because they didn't have any paperwork to prove it. So that sort of thing was getting to be a problem later on. But that comes with civilization. And civilization you can't have civilization without written language, organized government, I'm just going to write GOVT. So this is the things you need for a civilization. And 3 is surplus food. At this time in history, they do not have written language, except for the people in the church. Organized government, sorta, maybe. Surplus food, no surplus food. If you don't have surplus food, you don't have time to do anything but farm. So let me bring this up a little bit more. And for Notre Dame Cathedral, when they built that, they used full-size trees, oak trees, that had been growing for hundreds of years. On our street, there is an oak tree across the street that was a sapling when Columbus discovered America. We're all very proud of our oak tree in this neighborhood. And if anybody ever thought about doing anything to it, I would not want to be them. They would go after them, probably with ball bats, because people are very proud of our oak tree on this street. So this gives you an idea of the natural coloring of our thatched roofed farmhouse. I will do more coloring next week, but you know that the water should be sort of a green-blue because it would reflect the sky. The sky, you can leave it blue. We don't have to make it gray. If you don't have any blue, then you can make it gray. But don't color over your words because you got to be able to read that. And you would have had to build everything yourself. So think about that. it was a challenge just to stay alive. I'm going to blend these two colors. You can blend crayons. They really do well. Those of you who took art survey from me before, the Etruscans, who were the first people of Italy, invented crayons. And they've been around for a long time. Not the Etruscans, the crayons. I'm sure there are people sitting out there that don't even know they have Etruscan blood. I don't know. But since they were some of the earliest people, they were jolly people. I like that from their burial system. Okay, so we have, that's pretty much how this one should look too. And that's all for today. Please get this done.